Hello, everyone. David Wallach here, New View Safety Coach. Thank you for joining us for this episode in the Shut Up David series. We've got two special guests today to talk to you about all things hop and coaching. I'm not going to say too much. I'm going to let them fill you in the details, but you may have already heard of them. They're co-authors of a book, Human and Organizational Potential. So without much ado, let me bring them onto the stage and they can say hello. Ivan and
Hi, David.
Crista, hello.
Hello.
Hi, David. Thanks for
Thank you
having
very
us.
No worries at all. Thank you very much for agreeing to come on here, and apologies again for the mix up with all the time zones and emails and all that kind of stuff. I appreciate you both going out of your way to make time for this.
Not a problem at all. It's a beautiful afternoon here. I don't know what it's like there in Perth, but we're ready to chat with you a little bit about HOP.
That's marvelous. Here in Perth. It's 7:42 in the morning, and it's probably about 30 degrees outside already still. So we're just coming towards the end of our summer. So let's crack on with that. Okay. Well, great start. Why don't you both give a brief intro to yourselves, how you got to where you are and what you're currently doing, and then we can talk about the book, we can talk about hop, we can talk about coaching.
Sure. Would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm Crista Vesel.
Hi, Krista.
Hello. I'm an adjunct professor for the University of Alabama at Birmingham here in the States. And along with Professor Pupulidy, who's also my husband, we teach a lot of courses that bring in the human side and the potential of learning. So I teach things like crisis leadership, but not the normal crisis leadership. I go into culture, sense making, psychological safety, learning. All these things are so important when we look at that. And then I have two other courses I've created that are one of a kind in the world. One is communication and safety systems, greatly based on language, how we use language when we talk about safety and everything else. What leads us toward learning, what leads us away from learning. And then another one that's in its trial run right now, it's called Applied Semiotics in Safety. So semiotics are the signs and symbols we use to communicate with one another, which is about everything. But it deals with, what we see and what we feel and what we hear. And we get into this in a great amount of detail. I started my safety journey with Sidney Dekker at Lund University, Sweden. I received my master's degree from him, and I'm working on my doctorate right now.
That's awesome. Thank you for that. I also studied under Sidney Dekker at Griffith University here in Australia, the safety leadership postgrad degree there. A lot of what you're talking about there, Krista, as you're mentioning it, it all sounded to me like what your courses you developed and the courses that you teach as well. They all appear to be putting the person at the center. The person are making the person important in the whole system of safety. With your semiotics, with your learning, all that. Yeah, is that how you see it as well?
Oh, absolutely. Honestly, safety has devalued people and their role in everything for hundreds of years. You can go back to Descartes, and now we're going to think of man as a machine. Well, the language we use actually drives us to treat people like machines and with the same expectations. But that's not true, as you know. And so I work hard to help people from a more of a facilitator and coaching position, which I think you do a lot of, to develop relationships, to actually listen to one another, and to have real dialogue, something that doesn't happen that often. But as David Isaac says about dialogue, he says it's a container, and it's like a circle. It doesn't have sides. We all come to the middle. And we all need to share together in that space. And so when we teach our dialogic classes online with people around the world in many industries, we work hard to create a dialogic container even on a Zoom call.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting you mentioned that, because during my coaching training as well, um, it's not a it's the metaphor that's given isn't a circle, it's a crucible. It's a space in between that, it's free of judgment, especially from the coach, because that's not our area with which to judge. It's the other person's area with which to place meaning and to place insight and value and everything in there, and then for it to be a safe space where it can be discussed. Excuse me, discussed openly. But I really like that dialogic area that you're talking about there. That's great. Thank you for that, Krista. Ivan, what about yourself?
Well, I'm just lucky enough to be married to her. So that's all there is to my story. I started out as an operator. I've been an operator most of my life. I started out as a geophysicist, an actual working geophysicist, which was kind of amazing at the time. But I wanted a better view of rocks. So I got into aviation and I started flying for the Coast Guard. I flew Falcon jets, and then I flew C-130s. And I loved both those airframes, and I loved the Coast Guard. And at the end of 10 years of active duty, I wanted to pursue something a little bit different. So I went into the Air Force Reserves, and simultaneously I went into the Forest Service. So in my first 10 years of actively pursuing a career in aviation, I lost 2 friends in aviation accidents. In my first year in the Forest Service, I lost 3.
Right.
By the time I'd been in the Forest Service for 10 years, same amount of time as the Coast Guard, I'd lost over 25 friends in aviation accidents alone. We were killing people left and right in the wildland firefighting arena. And it's dangerous. It's a high-risk environment. I get all that. But the thing that bothered me the most is we were blaming the people who died for their own death, usually using adjectives to describe them that were fundamentally untrue. And we were doing that fundamentally because we were pushed to it by a process that we were given called the Serious Accident Investigation Guide, which literally said, if something went wrong, somebody failed to follow rules, regulations, policies, and procedures. Well, if that's the case, then I don't even have to do an investigation. I've already got my causal statement, right? All I have to do is cut and paste. I don't even need to go to the site. And frankly, the investigations that were being done, they weren't that slipshod, but they were focused in such a way that we couldn't really learn. So that forced me into a position of making a choice. I wanted to continue flying, so I did that, but I also took a collateral duty as a safety officer. And that opened my eyes to a lot of things. One thing it opened my eyes to was the need for additional education. So I went to Embry-Riddle University and I studied there for about a year in a master's degree program. And if I said I was bored, it might be an understatement. But I came across this guy, actually this book, this is the actual book, in a professor's office.
Field guide. Yeah.
In a professor's office who we hired to help us do an investigation. Naj Mishkati was the guy's office. And this book was laying in the corner of his office, and I grabbed it and I said, can I have this book, Naj? Can I take a look at it? He says, oh, Ivan, you can have book, take book. So I take the book and I start reading it. By the time I make it from his office in Los Angeles to my home in Littleton, Colorado, I've read the entire thing. I've tabbed it. I've underlined stuff. I needed to do something. And the thing that I needed to do was talk to this guy. So what do?
Decker.
I call him up. Yeah, Decker. I call him up on the phone and I say, hello, this is me. Who are you? Right? He says, of course. And I say, look, I'm just a guy who's trying to study this stuff. Here's the field that I'm in. And he says, hey, let's meet face to face. So we do. We meet face to face in Denver, Colorado. And he invites me to join his master's degree program at Lund University. This was a life-changing moment for me because it opened my eyes to a whole bunch of things that normal, traditional pathways would never expose us to. I mean, I was sitting there studying risk and all this kind of stuff and looking at green, amber, reds and thinking that ORM was the answer to everything. And
when was this, Ivan? When were you going through this with Decker?
Let's see. I've got
2008, I think.
Was it 2000? No, it was before that because I went to war in 2005. So anyway, right around 2000, early 2000s, mid 2000s, right around then. So I actually, literally, everything in my life pivots off of having to be activated and going to war, right? So everything's pre-war, post-war. Right?
Yeah.
So be that as it may, I got a lot of operational experience there, and I got a lot of educational experience through Decker, and started to find the need to do more, to do changes inside my organization. So the first change in the organization, the first place that I could actually lift where I stood, was in accident investigation because I'd been named as an investigator, one of the chief investigators in the organization. And so having this discussed with the serious accident investigation guide, I needed something more. And I literally went to an accident investigation, a fatality investigation. And instead of using the SAIG, I just picked this up.
Yep.
And I just used this as my guide to get through my first non-traditional accident investigation. Was I nervous? Oh yeah, I was really nervous. When it came time to present to the board, I had no idea if they'd accept it or not. And it was a balmy day in Washington, D.C. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but wet would be an understatement. Literally, I was drenched by the time I got to the office. And I walk
Humid
in.
place, is it?
Oh, it's humid and hot and miserable in July and June. And that's when we always seem to have these presentations. And it's a year after the fatality. And I sit down in this room. There's a lot of pomp and ceremony. There's a lot of circumstance and a lot of ritual. And I'm like, what do we need ritual for? We're trying to tell a story about a person who lost their life. How can we best tell that story? Do we need pomp and circumstance? Do we need ritual? Or can we just tell the story?
Yeah.
And so that's what I tried to do. And the designated agency safety and health administrator walks into the room. He's running late, which is not usually a good thing, right? When the big guy's running late. This is the number 3 guy in the Forest Service. And he sits down with a flourish in his seat. He's got 3 copies of the report that I read, and he throws them on the desk.
Oh,
and
not a good sign.
I'm done. It's over. And then he turns to me and he says, I read this last night for the 3rd time, and I want more of this. And in that moment, I realized where we were. We were on a journey as an organization. And a lot of things came together to get us to that place. A lot of different things that I talk about in a lot of different talks, and to some degree in this book that we wrote. But the things that came together put us in a position where our leaders were willing to become learners. And that's what we gave to them, was a document that activated them as learners, that gave them agency in their own learning about what happened, instead of putting them in a position where they had to control and judge. Pivotal moment.
This pivotal moment you talked about here now, is this the moment where you decided that you needed a different way of doing it, so you started your own process of the learning review? Is that?
That's exactly right. Yeah, this was the beginning of the learning review. And it was a beginning. I mean, it didn't start the way it ended, right? It started in a few big pushes and trying to get some big concepts across the line, including trying to give the story, the narrative, back to the people who were involved, instead of taking a narrative and saying, well, the narrative doesn't match the facts, so I'm going to change the narrative. I refused to do that. I wanted to honor the people who were involved with this incident. So we respected their story and told their story. And then we frankly looked at it from a bunch of different perspectives after that, some that were palatable to the agency. And so we looked a little bit of Swiss cheesy at the first one, and we got in there and kind of applied the Swiss cheese model and realized pretty quickly that that wasn't going to work. But we didn't know why at that point, right? So we hadn't been exposed to complex adaptive systems thinking yet. And we really didn't understand why the Swiss cheese wasn't working. And then I had other members of my team who were familiar with the Chicago's fishbone diagram, and they wanted to do that. And we had others that wanted to do the 5 whys, and they wanted to do that. So we tried those different modalities during this first experiment, and we found that those things worked for only part of the investigation that we were doing at the time. And so that set us up to start to examine, why is this working here and not working someplace else? What's the aspect that we're missing in this? And that's when I'm going to say it quite frankly, that's when we stumbled across complex systems, because we realized that the tools that we had were great for a simpler or complicated system, but they didn't touch the complex system. They just didn't do it.
And if you have people in a system, it's always complex.
It's always complex.
Exactly. Those systems you mentioned, and their almost linear approach are great for systems which are linear and predictable and that don't diverge much and aren't complex. But as Chris just mentioned there as well, when you start putting a human at the point of making critical decisions within a system, it's complex by default, isn't it? And I think Decker actually comes up with a great way of looking at those things. the Decker tunnel, I think it is, isn't it? Which is this whole hindsight bias, and we can look forward and look back, and whenever we look back, we tend to see it as a simple process or a simple act or a simple mistake, whereas in retrospect, it's actually so much more complex than that, especially if there's humans making critical decisions in the process.
Yeah, Decker's model is it's a metaphor for, it's one metaphor for looking at the introduction of people in a complex adaptive system. I like to think about it this way. The individual walks into this situation and they have their background, their heuristics, their biases, their knowledge, their skills, their abilities, and they see what the system is delivering to them in that moment. And they react to that. And when they react, the system changes. And then when the system changes, they learn and they change themselves in an ongoing, ever repeating cycle of events.
Yep.
That's why it's nonlinear. And the other thing we have to understand about it is that not only is it complex from that perspective, but it's also complex from the perspective of the relationship of all the different components of the system.
Yep.
And so no model has really tried to capture that. Look at the relationship between different things inside the system. And the learning review is deeply focused on looking at the conditions or performance shaping factors, the things that shape what people do, the things that influence, not cause, but influence what people do.
That's directly from the human factors side of things, isn't it? The performance shaping factors. That's where that comes in there. So Crista and Ivan, thank you for that intro there for both. And I'm just going to give a high level feeling or summary from both.
It's still going.
Should we have a conversation just in case we're on?
Yeah, maybe. What should we talk about? So that's when the language comes in. Why don't you talk a little bit about the language?
Sorry. Yeah, we got cut off there, didn't we?
Yeah, it was quite fun on this end. We didn't know what to do, but we were thinking about martinis.
I just got the spinning wheels of death, to be honest with you. So, okay, hopefully I'll cut that bit out, so we won't get to see that. We won't get to see all that. As I was saying, thank you both for your introduction. You can see, that you both have your technical capability and your academic, your background there and your real life experience as well, and you've both approached this human as the center from similar but slightly different ways, haven't you? Ivan, yourself, yours is predominantly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, from an instant investigation process and getting to tell the story of the individual, whereas Chris, yours is from a human factors perspective, in relation to how is the human situated within the system as a general whole. Is that fair statement to make?
We teach all our classes together, so I don't know that we're actually separate.
Yeah,
we wrote the book
really
together.
Don't know where
we do
one
things
begins
together.
and the other one ends.
Right. Okay.
I want to mention one thing.
Yep.
Keep referring to it as the human. We really like to think of them as people, because from a language perspective, if we call someone a human, it's easy to use that label without feeling a relationship with that person. And we see challenges with this in accident investigations, for example, because now you can set that person aside and say, oh, well, see, they're no longer part of our group. They're alone. They're at fault. They're a bad person. We use situational or dispositional attribution error against the person. And we say, see, we don't think this necessarily, but it's what's happening. We start to blame them.
It's the us and them comes into it, really, doesn't it?
Yes, but we think of them as being the outgroup, and also that it's something wrong with them. So it's their disposition. It's who they are. They're a lazy person. They're, a bad person. It's easy to do that when we label them in certain ways. And one of those I find can be even the word human. So we generally just talk about people.
No, that's cool. I understand that. The language we use has got a direct and indirect power, and how it makes people perceive what we're talking about. And I appreciate that. Thank you for that. Talking about language as well, I noticed your book, the book that both of you wrote together, is called Human Organizational Potential. and not human organizational performance. Is that subtle change deliberate? And if so, why? In
Yeah,
fact, what I
let me
might do.
explain a little bit about the origin, and then the deliberate nature will be explained by Krista.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
the origin of it was, we started working with Todd Conklin in 2006, I believe it was. Sidney Decker sent us down there, said, "Hey, you've got to look at this guy. He's great. He's got something. It's really amazing." So we go down to his program at Los Alamos National Laboratory, and it's called Human Performance Improvement. That was the name of it, HPI. And we listened to what he's doing. And what we recognized pretty quickly is that that wasn't what he was doing. He wasn't improving human performance. He was understanding human performance. And so we immediately had a little bit of a rub when Todd said, "Steal this thing, take it all back to the Forest Service, use it how you will, but give it to a bunch of people." So two of us actually went down and studied with Todd, developed a version of it for the Forest Service. And that version was called Human Organization Potential. And the reason it was called potential and not performance is because we weren't trying to get into the performance realm anymore. We were trying to understand and release the potential that existed inside the organization. And you can talk a little bit more about why we titled the book that way.
For us, it's important to move away from the idea of performance, because performance can become a push. We see it with our students and colleagues that work in many different industries. And when their companies focus on performance, it becomes something over the top of them, something that can be manipulated. And that is not what we want to do. We want to help people to learn and grow. And so that potential should be unlimited. And I think that the word means a lot. It frames our book and says, we're looking at potential, and everyone's potential, not one group's, but everyone has this opportunity.
And if I can quote from the book, what we wrote was, "Relationships, systemic understanding, and learning from all levels of work can lead to meaningful and relevant cultural interventions. Some interventions apply well to parts of the system where cause and effect relationships are direct and predictable. However, these same interventions can often disrupt learning and improvement in the complex adaptive parts of the system. The idea of potential explores the spectrum of interventions that help the organizations to shape sustainable change."
I like it. I like it. And again, it goes back to the point, Krista, about using the word people and not humans. Again, it's the power of the word, isn't it? It's what we actually. And I hadn't, I got introduced to HOP probably 5 years ago, and I've never really thought about the verbiage, the words that were used in there. But I like the what you're saying there about, if you have that word performance, it almost speaks to being like a metric for a person within the organization. They've got their performance because they were employed to do something, and we want to manage that, that performance of that person. And that then becomes, like you said, almost a limiting factor to the person's potential. Whereas the potential it's not just within the organizational context, it's within the human or the person capability and performance context as well, isn't it? It does place the human even more. It does place the person even more in the center and give them more importance in this whole conversation around safety and how we go about making it better. So no, I appreciate that. I hadn't thought about it, but thank you for bringing that up.
But there's another layer to this too, which is we bring this up in the book. We have a different culture model that is based on Edgar Schein's original culture model, who you and Schein spent lots of time together. They were very good friends. But essentially the model has a buoy on top of the water and then a line going down to an anchor.
Yep.
That top level of culture are artifacts. They're things that we can see. They're things that we directly experience, and someone outside of our culture can even come in and see them. That includes
posters
behaviors.
on the wall, behaviors, all the kind of
behaviors,
all the materialistic things we can see.
So I'm going to concentrate on behaviors, because what happens is we have a lot of leaders and managers, and they want to change behaviors.
Yep.
But really, all that does is push the buoy around, and then it
Mhm.
pops right back, because you're not changing those deeper levels of culture, which is where you really need to explore and change.
Gotcha. And this is the culture model that you guys have come up with, actually works on that premise of the buoy, the boy, and how it's then right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And what are the facets of the chain? What are the anchors? What are the things below the surface of the waterline which affect the position of the buoy on the surface? What are they? Can we talk about them?
Ed's original model was an iceberg. And at the top of the iceberg, he always shows what's floating, what you can see, right? And he called that the artifact level. That's what you see when you first get into an organization. So his metaphor is not bad. I mean, don't get the wrong idea. Ed and I talked about this for a long time, and I showed him the buoy model, and he really liked it because it explains things in a little bit different way. Because the next level that you see that's just below the surface are the espoused values, the things that the organization says it does, right? The safety first slogans that appear in different places. Those espoused values
Public
are also
values. Yeah.
and that's represented by the anchor chain. But the thing that keeps the buoy in place is the anchor that's in the soil, in the mud, in the bottom of the ocean or the bottom of the bay. And that deep anchor are the deep assumptions. Without changing those deep assumptions, you will never relocate the buoy. So you may move the buoy to the length of the line, the slack in the chain, but once you stop pushing on it, it's ultimately going to go right back over the anchor again. So the metaphor is really good from that perspective. If you want to shift culture, you've got to shift those deep assumptions.
But most people never even explore those. In my crisis leadership class, I actually have students mind map their culture according to these levels and see how all these things are interconnected and really get down to those deep assumptions. And I tell them, if you start to feel uncomfortable and you don't want to go there, you know you've hit a deep assumption. But most people don't like to do that because most of us aren't comfortable with change.
No. You're right. And I wrote a blog post on this a couple of weeks ago, which was being poked in the axioms, which was talking about how people don't like their inner beliefs and their unquestionable truths questioned. But it's also, as you said, then it's those uncomfortable places we have to go to if we want to learn anything at all about ourselves, because that's where the real gold is, isn't it? And what's at the end of that chain? What's that anchor? Is that the leadership is that the individuals and the leaders, the senior leaders within the organization? Am I right in assuming that?
It's all the deep assumptions held by all of them. See, a lot of people think that culture is kind of dictated from on high. It comes from the leadership of the organization and it's transmitted to the field. That's not necessarily true. The field has an equal influence in changing leadership. In fact, if we think about evolutionary, the best a leader can do is evolve the culture in their organization. But the underlings in an organization, that's revolution, right? That's the big upheavals. And we saw that firsthand in the Forest Service when we were faced with what we felt was a crisis of trust. So the crisis of trust was we no longer trusted our accident investigation system, and we didn't trust the leaders who upheld that system. So we revolted from the field level. We said no more of this. We threw off the shackles and we said we're going to do this differently because we had already challenged, our assumptions were already challenged. If we were ever in the camp, and I was, because I went through Navy accident investigation training. I went through Air Force accident investigations training to the level of board president. And I even graduated USC and got the most expensive ball cap in the history of mankind by completing the aviation safety program at USC. So I'm a qualified accident investigator in the traditional sense, but that didn't equip me to understand how guys who are operating with each other in relationship to other people who are working in the same way with King radios and chainsaws as their technology, how that functions and how that fails and how it succeeds is not covered in any of the traditional accident investigation models.
So let me link these two threads that we've just been talking about together. So on the one hand, we've been talking about the culture of an organization and how important that is. And on this hand, we're talking about highly complex and adaptive environments and how we learn from them in order to be able to make them better. So if I could bring those two theories, those two discussion points together and go, what cultural artifacts or structures are there which enable a learning culture within an organization? What does an organization need for it to be a learning organization?
Well, now this is where leadership gets involved. If leadership can be moved to a mode of inquiry, you're going to start a learning culture inside your organization. But it's very critical that leadership is in that mode of inquiry. If they're in a mode of knowing, inquiry and learning can die in an organization. It's very, very simple that leadership may not drive the development of culture, but they can kill culture development
Yes.
very quickly, right? So cultural change can be wiped out in a nanosecond. So what we look at is what Shine used to say is what we measure, reward, and punish inside an organization. That shapes our culture the quickest. That's where we see the fastest cultural change. So we have to look at those aspects. Those are artifacts in our culture. We have to look at those artifacts and ask ourselves, do the artifacts that we have, do the things that we support in terms of what we measure, reward, and punish, do they lead us toward learning or do they lead us away from learning? That isn't to say we're going to abandon everything that we do. That's not the way it works. This is where that evolutionary change comes in. And so we start to question, is this the right thing to do if we want to learn? And as long as we build that pause in, we build inquiry into the system. So structurally, we insert it, right? Structurally, we insert it. And ultimately, the culture adapts to it because they see the value in it.
Okay.
And part of that is developing relationships and really valuing the people in your system and empowering them to develop psychological safety or psychological confidence, which will then allow them to speak. Sometimes they need to speak truth to power. That has to be accepted. That's back to the measure, reward, and punish piece. So, if they can freely speak amongst one another and to their leadership, then you're going to start to see things change because they're going to start to tell what's happening in their area of work. And often that's not shared.
No, you used a term there, which really landed with me, which was empowering the people in order to be able to I suppose, empower them to tell their narrative, to tell their story, to tell their viewpoint of how they see the world at that particular moment in time. How would one go about empowering? Is this where we start to look at the idea of coaching individuals within organizations and providing that safe space? Or what other methodologies do you use in order to be able to empower the individuals?
So let's talk about that word empowerment. It's kind of interesting. I'm kind of glad you landed on it in a way, because we think of empowerment plus. So it's not just empowerment, it's yes and. So when we think about empowerment, the first thing we've got to think about is who are we empowering? Where does the empowerment lie, right? What does that mean? Well, if we equate it to learning, then what we're really saying is not empowerment per se. It's the empowerment to learn. It's giving agency to the learner. So when we talk about the accident itself, so accidents by themselves are not very interesting, right? Why did the person fall on the ice? Because ice is slippery, right? Why was the person on the ice? That might be a better question, right? So we want to start thinking about this a little bit differently. The accident itself gets us to a place where we get to look at these surrounding conditions, these influences that swirl around people all the time. Those things are much more interesting. So once we move from the accident itself into understanding and mapping these different things that exist inside our organizations all the time in terms of pressures and modalities and desires and influences from the leadership. Once we start to understand those, we start to discover goal conflicts. We start to discover the things that are embedded inside our system that we've never asked about before, because like a fish, You never see the water you're swimming in. Culture's kind of the same way, right? But if
Yeah.
we actually put it down on paper and ask ourselves the question, why did it make sense for the individual to do what they did? And then map those conditions, those influencing factors, then we see something completely different. We start to uncover the things that are floating in that water. And we literally do a bunch of different things as a result of that. Everything from changing the definition of situational awareness, which now we say is if you understand what's surrounding you, you understand those influences, you've got a better understanding of your situation, rather than this idea of omnipotence, which never made any sense to me. I mean, there's only one or two deities in mankind's knowledge that are omnipotent, and I'm not one of them. So once we move from that, we start moving to a very different place, right? And the place that we move to is a place of deeper understanding of what it is about the system that influences our people. Then we can start to say this. Let's listen to what James Reason said way back when. He said, you cannot change the human condition, but you can change the conditions under which humans work. Only if you understand those conditions, right?
Context drives behavior.
There you go.
And in addition, we've mentioned accidents and incidents, but that is honestly not where we like to focus attention. We want people to go to normal work because that's where you can make changes that make a big difference. Unfortunately, a lot of organizations only fund really big accidents, time, money, people. And so how do you know you're growing your organization toward a learning organization? When you start to value that normal work, because that's a big piece.
Yeah.
And what, in your opinions, what would you say are some of the biggest hurdles to an organization becoming a learning organization and learning from that everyday work so that they can begin to improve? They can begin to predict what, some of the future problems might be, or some of the, friction and pain points that their employees are feeling that could potentially down the road lead into accidents. You have to understand, as you said, the current work, the work that's done every day, and talk about that. But what are some of the main hurdles that you're experiencing trying to get that across the line?
From a leadership level, it's usually the fear of what they're giving up, right? So there's a fear that if they give up punishment, for example. So Todd and Sydney often say, you can punish or you can learn, but you can't do both. And I agree with them completely in that. You really can't do both of those things. Or you have to redefine what learning means, right? Learning can mean that I'm not going to say anything. Learning can mean silence.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you can punish people, but you have to realize that there is a cost to that, and acknowledge what's going to happen.
Yeah, and you're not going to get the learnings after that, are you?
That's it.
Usually
and
not.
That's the sacrifice. So when we ask leadership to embrace this modality, we're asking them to give up that idea of punishment as the primary means of motivating people to do things. And by the way, history's kind of proven that it doesn't really motivate people to do things. People do things out of fear. Then they just don't do what you don't want them to do, or do what you want them to do when they're being watched. But the rest of the time, they're out doing what they're going to do because of these other things that exist inside the system. So it's the biggest hurdle is getting leadership to move into that mode where they can understand that, right? That they're really not giving up anything that they actually have. They don't really have control in complex systems. The other thing that we have to think about is predictability. So certain aspects of systems are predictable. Simple and complicated systems, high level of predictability because the cause and effect relationship is strong. But once we get into a complex system, the level of predictability evaporates. And a super complex system is really, really difficult to predict. It's impossible to predict. So we remove prediction from our vocabulary in complex systems. And what we move toward is understanding. So what are we going to understand? Well, we have to understand that there are ways that we can deal with upset, because upset is going to be a natural process or natural emergence in a complex system. We are going to get the unexpected. Surprise is going to happen. So when that surprise happens, how do we want to be positioned for it? That's what HOP is all about. It's developing that understanding of how we position ourselves in a way that when we do have an upset inside the system, we can adapt to it quickly and we can minimize the effects of it. And then the backside of it is that we have to learn from it. That's the resilience engineering piece of it. So what I want to say is this. We stand on the shoulders of some really, really remarkable people who've gone before us.
Certainly
and
do.
they've put a lot of work into what we put together and call HOP. But what HOP is as much as it is anything else, it is a way of bringing people together around these ideas and principles so that they can activate what other people like Jens Rasmussen, even James Reason, what Sidney Decker, what Eric Holnagel, what David Woods, what these people have said to us. And then we go beyond that. We go to the next layer, which is understanding the psychology of it, understanding complex systems. Ruben McDaniel, Edgar Morin, these people help us with complexity. We move then to the next level of this, and we start moving out in these concentric rings that move us away from the center and move us into these other areas that help us to really explore. Because what are we trying to do? We're trying to understand relationships. What helps us with that? In our little confines, in our companies, dialogue, communication. That's what helps us with that. Outside, it's kind of the same thing, but now we're dialoguing and communicating with people like John Adams, who writes a book that's a 4-letter word called risk, right? But he looks at it so much differently that most of the people who believe in risk and the religion of risk would say, oh, it's hogwash, it's crap, right? But it's really not, because it's the way people perceive the risk. And that turns out to be pretty darn important when you start dealing with people, right?
Yeah. No. And I'm conscious of time as well, because I know that you guys want to get wrapped up fairly soon. But sorry, Krista, you were just about to say something then.
I just wanted to mention one thing about this book, which is there's a lot of books on HOP out there. And what we wanted to do was to give some of the theoretical underpinning, which most of them don't give, and to give people resources that they can go into further if that's of interest to them. So you can ladder off the book and go to the end and find all kinds of resources that will help you learn even more about complexity or culture or learning or whatever really tapped your interest.
And I'll never say that it's a how-to guide, because there's always an element, a very strong element of self-design involved in any application of anything that you're doing. So not every single thing is going to fit every single organization. So I wrote this as a textbook, to be a textbook, but not in the form of a textbook. So it is a textbook for my HOP class that I teach at the university, but it's not designed to be read like a textbook. It provides that theoretical underpinning, as Krista said, but it also says, and here's the application, and here's how our students are applying it, and here's how you might explore applying it, because everything that you do in a complex system is an exploration. It's an experiment. You don't know if it's going to work.
And I'm assuming it's one of those books as well, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you actually don't necessarily read it linearly either. You can go forwards and backwards and hop around.
Hop around.
Pardon the pun.
I love
here
it.
Here in Australia, HOP, Human Organizational Performance, it's been around, I say around for probably 10 years, but it's only really just starting to gain popularity within the last 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And it's actually becoming one of the most dominant safety acronyms now, after the dust settled with Safety 2 and Safety Differently from DECA and all those others. HOP seems to be the predominant safety acronym that's going around at the moment. And there's an organization you may have heard of, South Pacific, here with Andy Schoen, and they do a lot of the training and a lot of the implementation of that, and they're starting to expand exponentially because of the desire and the want for this HOP. But from memory, HOP has been around for close to 30 years in America, hasn't it? It's not a new thing. It's been around for quite a while.
2005.
Right. Okay.
Ish.
Okay.
Yeah.
So close to 20 years.
And we explain where the name came from in the book. One of the origin stories of the name. There's several, right? Because like any good thing, we come up with names that are related to one another. What were we going to say?
I was just going to say, we were just in Wollongong for the big conference.
Oh yes. Yeah. And the Global Safety Summit.
Yeah, that's it.
Innovation.
Innovation. We were there for the whole week. We learned a lot too. It was a lot of fun. Met a lot of people.
Yeah, right.
And
so Zoe Nation, who helped organize that, she lives in Perth, and
Adam Johns, who we know really well.
Yeah,
he's from the UK, isn't he?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
so I think it's one thing that I'd like to leave you with here, and that is that we're not trying to sell HOP with this book. We're trying to help you understand it so that
Yeah.
you can use whatever process you want to develop or want to garner from some of these other people that are out there selling processes. You can do that, but understand the underpinning behind it. Understand what it's all about. And we're professors in a university program that relies very heavily on understanding this material. So when we present it, it's not so that we can monetize it. That's not our goal. Our goal is to really get the information out there and to really share that information with anybody who's interested in HOP. And that's really what the book was designed for. That's why we wrote it.
That's awesome. And I'll be putting a link in the description below. I don't know why I do this. Every time I talk about putting a link, I think I've seen too many people doing it in YouTube videos, and I just like the idea of having things all over the place. I'm going to put a link in the description below, which is going to be to Amazon, which will straight to Human Organizer Potential by Ivan and Crista. So people will have an easy access to be able to get to your book and have a look at that, which is now on my reading list and should have been before I spoke to you guys. But my apologies for that. There has been a lot going on in the past few weeks. But thank you so much for your time. It's very much appreciated, Ivan and Crista.
I just want to note one thing, which is what you get in Australia for the book, it's in black and white. We're sorry about that, but you don't have color printing for Amazon.
We don't have color printing for Amazon in Australia.
Well, you do, but it's a much higher premium book, and that would have driven the price way up. So
Gotcha.
you have a black and white one, but if you can get it from America or other countries, then you'll get the full color. And there's a number of full color images in there.
Yes, you might want to put both links at the bottom of your page.
Yeah, just go to your local Amazon and look up the name.
Yep.
I certainly will. I'll locate both links and I'll make sure they're both in there with the color.
Thanks.
The color coding being the difference between the two. Thank you so much for your time, Ivan and Crista. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and it's been a whirlwind of learning, and especially with the definition of words, the way we use words, and the power that they have. Thank you for that as well, Crista. Very much appreciated. And yes, I'll let you be because I know you have tea on the oven, and it's evening time for you there. So thank you again, both very much.
Thank you for having us,
Thank
David.
you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.